Captain Jai-Ho Park stood at the large window of Space Station Centauri, watching the countless ships move through space. His dark uniform, marked with the red and white stripes of Earth's Emergency Response Division, stood out among the flowing robes and metallic suits of the alien officials around him. The message from the Galactic Council had been clear. They needed humans. After 20 years of failed attempts to create working emergency response teams with other species, the Council had finally admitted they had a problem. They needed the one thing that made humans different: their ability to work in chaos. "Captain Park, the Council is ready to see you now," said a tall, blue-skinned assistant. Jai-Ho nodded and followed her through the station's bright corridors. Inside the Council chamber, representatives from 50 different species sat in rising circles, like a giant bowl reaching up to the stars. Some floated in special containers filled with their breathing gases. Others sat on heated or cooled seats that kept them alive in the station's standard atmosphere. "Captain Park," spoke Head Counselor MEX 427, their crystalline body glowing softly. "We have reviewed Earth's emergency response success rates. They are impressive." The counselor's translator turned their musical language into words Jai-Ho could understand. Jai-Ho stepped forward. "Thank you, Head Counselor, but I'm curious why you called me here. Your message didn't explain much." A large, spider-like being called Counselor Rithn moved forward. "We have a problem, Captain. Our emergency teams don't work. They freeze. They calculate too long. They fail." Jai-Ho understood immediately. He had seen it before. Alien species were often smarter than humans, but in emergencies, being smart wasn't always helpful. "You want to know why humans are different?" "No," said MEX 427. "We want you to build something new. A mixed emergency response unit, here on Station Centauri. You will teach others the human way." The chamber filled with worried whispers. Many species still thought humans were dangerous and reckless. Jai-Ho heard words like unstable and unpredictable in various languages. With respect, Jai-Ho said, his voice firm but polite, "Human emergency response works because of how our brains handle stress. We make fast decisions without perfect information. Other species often can't do this. Their minds work differently." "Exactly." Counselor Rithen's voice buzzed with excitement. "This is why we need you. Last month, a ship lost power near the spiral arm. The emergency team spent 40 minutes calculating the perfect rescue plan. By then, half the crew had died." Jai-Ho felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he got whenever he heard about lives lost that could have been saved. "A human team would have acted in 5 minutes, he said quietly. "Yes," MEX 427 agreed. "We have studied your species. You have something we call controlled recklessness. You take risks, but smart risks. Quick, but not blind. We need this." Jai-Ho looked around the chamber. Some council members looked worried, others hopeful. He thought about all the lives that could be saved, all the disasters that could be handled better. He thought about his own team back on Earth and how they worked together in the worst situations. "I'll do it," he said, "but I need full authority to run this my way. Emergency response isn't about following perfect protocols. It's about adapting, changing plans when they don't work, and sometimes breaking rules to save lives." The council chamber went completely silent. Breaking rules was not something most species were comfortable with. But after a long moment, MEX 427's crystal body pulsed with blue light, a sign of agreement. "You have your authority, Captain Park. Your first task is to select your team. Choose carefully. The galaxy is watching." As Jai-Ho left the council chamber, his mind was already working on plans. He would need the right people, humans who could not only handle emergencies but also teach others. This wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. The galaxy was about to learn a new way of handling disasters, whether it was ready or not. Hae-Nul Kim was drinking her morning coffee when the emergency alarm started blaring throughout Space Station Centauri. The new multi-species emergency response center, barely 3 months old, burst into activity. Status report. She called out, setting down her cup and rushing to the command center. The large screen in front of her showed a luxury passenger vessel, the Star Diamond, drifting in space. The Star Diamond's main engine has failed, reported her assistant, a tall insectoid named Tix. They're carrying 500 passengers, including the entire crystalline diplomatic delegation. Newell felt her heart rate increase, but her mind remained clear. This was why humans were different. Stress made them sharper, not frozen. Time until critical failure. The ship's computer estimates 28 minutes before complete power loss. Tix said, his antennae twitching nervously. The standard protocol suggests we should run 16 different safety calculations before. No time. Newell cut in. Alert rescue ships 1 through 4. We launch in 3 minutes. The other aliens in the control room looked at her with shock. A floating gas-filled sphere containing a mist being drifted forward. Officer Kim, regulations require minimum preparation time of 15 minutes for. Those regulations were written by species that don't understand emergency response, Newell said firmly. Captain Park put me in charge of field operations. We go now. As her team rushed to the rescue ships, Newell's mind raced through the challenges. The crystalline diplomats would shatter if the temperature dropped too low. Other species on board needed specific atmospheric conditions. Some couldn't survive in normal gravity if the artificial gravity failed. The rescue ships launched smoothly into space. Through the view screen, Newell could see the Star Diamond growing larger. Its sleek silver hull was dark in places where power had already failed. Hull temperature dropping in sections 3 through 7, reported her sensor officer, another human named Du-1. The crystalline section will reach critical temperature in 12 minutes. Newell made quick decisions. Team 1, focus on the crystalline section. Team 2, handle the atmospheric breaches in the main hull. Team 3, start evacuating the standard atmosphere sections. Team 4, with me to the engine room. Her alien crew members looked uncertain, but they had trained for this. They knew that questioning orders during a crisis meant death for those they were trying to save. The rescue ships locked onto different sections of the Star Diamond. Newell led her team through the emergency airlock. The ship's corridors were dark, lit only by emergency lighting. They could hear the screech of failing metal around them. Engine room sealed due to radiation leak, reported her engineer, a silicon-based being named Orcs. Safety protocols require a 17-step decontamination procedure. Newell was already moving. Override the door locks. Du-1, get me a radiation suit. But the protocols. Orcs started. We'll get everyone killed. Newell finished. Sometimes you have to break rules to save lives. She sealed her radiation suit and entered the engine room. The massive engine core was pulsing with dangerous energy, its containment field failing. Newell moved quickly, her training kicking in. She bypassed the safety systems, rerouted emergency power, and stabilized the core enough to buy them time. In other parts of the ship, her teams worked with the same controlled urgency. The crystalline diplomats were moved to heated emergency pods. Passengers were efficiently evacuated. Problems were solved as they appeared, without waiting for perfect solutions. 45 minutes later, Newell stood in the Star Diamond's empty bridge. Every passenger and crew member had been rescued. The ship itself was stable enough to be towed to a repair station. Back on Space Station Centauri, the alien observers were silent as they watched the rescue recordings. They had just witnessed something they didn't quite understand. Humans working in chaos, making quick decisions that saved lives. How do you know when to break the rules? Tix asked Newell quietly. She smiled slightly. We don't. We just know that doing something imperfect now is better than doing something perfect too late. The Star Diamond incident would become the first of many lessons the galaxy would learn about human emergency responders. It wasn't their technology or their strength that made them special. It was their ability to act when others could only think. Lieutenant Su Bin Lee watched the emergency alerts flash across her screen. 3 disasters were happening at once, and each one was getting worse. The Star Diamond rescue had brought them fame, but now they faced an even bigger test. In Dock 7, a cargo ship's coolant system was failing. In Dock 12, a passenger ship's life support was shutting down. And in Dock 3, a small research vessel was dealing with a dangerous chemical spill. The alien emergency teams were struggling with all 3 situations. "Lieutenant, we have a problem," said her assistant, a tall tree-like being named Arbor. "The standard emergency protocols. They're making things worse." Su Bin looked at the data and saw he was right. The alien teams were following their training perfectly, but that was the problem. They were treating each emergency separately, following step-by-step procedures that didn't work when multiple crises happened at once. "Show me the cargo ship first," Su Bin ordered. The screen changed to show the inside of the ship. The alien emergency team was still discussing the best way to fix the coolant system. Meanwhile, the temperature was rising to dangerous levels. "They'd been talking for 7 minutes, Arbor reported. "They want to be sure they make the right choice." Su Bin pressed the emergency override button. "This is Lieutenant Lee. All teams, listen carefully. We're changing the plan." She looked at the data from all 3 ships. The cargo ship's failing coolant system was making it hot. The passenger ship needed cold air for its life support, and the research vessel's chemical spill needed to be contained. "Team 1, stop trying to fix the coolant system," she ordered. "Instead, connect a pipe from the cargo ship to the passenger ship. Use the extra heat to power their life support." The alien team members were confused. This wasn't in any protocol, but they had learned to trust their human leaders. "Team 2, Su Bin continued, take the cold air from the space between the ships and pump it back into the cargo ship. It's not perfect, but it will buy us time." She turned to the chemical spill last. The research vessel's team was still calculating how the chemicals might react with different containment materials. But Su Bin saw a simpler solution. "Team 3, use the emergency force fields to push all the chemicals into the cargo hold. Then freeze them using the cold air we're cycling through. We can deal with them properly once they're solid." The alien teams moved quickly now, following her orders. They had learned that humans might seem reckless, but their plans usually worked. 20 minutes later, all 3 ships were stable. The cargo ship's heat was powering the passenger ship's life support. The chemical spill was safely frozen. It wasn't a perfect fix, but everyone was alive. In the control room, Arbor looked at Su Bin with his leafy sensors trembling. "How did you know this would work?" "None of these solutions were in our training." Su Bin smiled slightly. "Humans don't just learn solutions. We learn how to make new solutions. Sometimes the best answer isn't in any manual." Later that day, Su Bin filed her report to Captain Park. She explained how the standard protocols had failed and why they needed to teach their alien teammates a new way of thinking. "The breaking point isn't when systems fail," she wrote. "It's when we fail to adapt." Today, our alien teammates learned that emergency response isn't about following rules. It's about understanding why the rules exist and knowing when to try something new. The report would become required reading at the Emergency Response Academy. It showed exactly why humans were different. While other species looked for perfect solutions, humans found ways to turn problems into answers. This was just the beginning of what the galaxy would learn from them. Commander Tai Yang Choi stood in the emergency control room of Space Station Centauri, facing the largest crisis of his career. A massive transport ship carrying 2,000 colonists had collided with a debris field. The ship's hull was breached in multiple places, and its systems were failing rapidly. "Status report," Tai Yang demanded, his eyes fixed on the main screen showing the damaged vessel. "The ship's structure is compromised in 17 places," reported his senior engineer, a crystalline being named Prisma. "Standard protocols suggest evacuation, but we don't have enough rescue ships within range." Tai Yang studied the information flowing across his screens. The colonists were from 12 different species, each with their own survival needs. Some needed methane to breathe, others could only survive in high pressure, and some would die if exposed to ordinary light. "Commander," said his second-in-command, a floating gas creature named Aura, "by regulations, we should wait for additional rescue ships. The risk calculations show." "We don't have time for calculations," Tai Yang interrupted. "Those people will be dead before help arrives." He pressed the emergency broadcast button. "This is Commander Choi. I'm taking direct control of all emergency resources." The alien staff watched nervously as Tai Yang began giving orders that went against every safety protocol they knew. "Engineering team, take apart the station's backup force field generators. Medical team, bring me all the stasis pods we have. Maintenance crew, I need every power cell you can find." As his teams rushed to follow orders, Tai Yang turned to the station's maintenance robots. "Strip down these robots. I need their power units and their small force field generators." "Commander," Prisma protested, "these modifications are not approved. The equipment wasn't designed for this." "Innovation never is," Tai Yang replied. He pointed to the screen showing the colonists' life signs. "In 40 minutes, those people die. We have to try something new." His plan was dangerous but simple. They would use the stripped-down force field generators to create emergency containment bubbles around groups of colonists. Each bubble would be programmed to maintain the exact conditions each species needed to survive. "The force fields won't last long on battery power," Tai Yang explained as his teams worked. "But they don't need to. They just need to keep people alive until more rescue ships arrive." The alien crew members watched in amazement as human engineers tore apart million-credit equipment, turning it into emergency survival tools. They broke rules, ignored safety margins, and worked with a speed that seemed reckless to alien eyes. When the first containment bubbles were ready, Tai Yang led the rescue mission himself. They moved through the damaged ship section by section, creating safe zones for each group of colonists. Where the bubbles couldn't reach, they used modified stasis pods. Hour after hour, they worked without rest. The alien crew members began to understand why humans were different. It wasn't just their ability to ignore rules or work fast. It was their ability to see new ways to use old things, to make tools do jobs they were never meant to do. 3 hours later, when the rescue ships finally arrived, they found every colonist alive. The transport ship was lost, but its passengers were safe in their makeshift containment fields, each group perfectly preserved in their needed environment. Back on the station, Tai Yang found his alien crew still studying the emergency containment bubbles they had created. "How did you know this would work?" Aura asked. "These force fields were never designed to maintain different atmospheric conditions." "We didn't know," Tai Yang admitted. "But humans have learned that when the usual solutions won't work, you have to make new ones. Sometimes, the best tools are the ones you create in the moment." The improvised containment bubbles would later become standard emergency equipment throughout the galaxy. But more importantly, the aliens had learned another lesson about humans. In an emergency, the best solution might not be the one in the manual, but the one you haven't invented yet. Senior Medical Officer Yoon-hee Kang never expected to become famous across the galaxy. She was just doing her job, treating patients the way she had been trained. But after the rescue of the transport ship colonists, everything changed. The Galactic Medical Council had called an emergency meeting on Space Station Centauri. Representatives from every major species filled the medical conference room, all wanting to learn about human emergency medical techniques. "Dr. Kang," spoke the head medical director, a tall being made of pure energy contained in a special suit. "Please explain how you treated 12 different species during the transport ship crisis without losing a single patient." Yoon-hee stood at the center of the room, surrounded by floating screens showing medical data. "The answer is simple," she said. "We stopped treating the manual as absolute truth." The room filled with concerned whispers. For most species, medical manuals were sacred texts that could not be questioned. During the crisis, we had patients who needed completely different environments to survive. He continued. The manual said we couldn't treat them all at once. So we found a new way. She showed them the emergency medical pods her team had created. They had taken standard medical equipment and modified it to work in ways no one had tried before. We turned oxygen tanks into pressure chambers, she explained. We used cooling units as heating systems. We even reversed gravity fields to keep some patients stable. A crystalline doctor raised their light patterns in concern. But these modifications were not tested. They could have failed. Yes, he agreed. But doing nothing would have meant certain death. Humans understand that sometimes an imperfect solution that might work is better than a perfect solution that comes too late. She showed them more examples, cases where human doctors had created new treatments in the middle of emergencies, times when they had combined medicines in ways that weren't in any manual but saved lives. The difference, she explained, is that humans don't just memorize treatments. We understand why they work. This lets us create new treatments when we need them. The alien doctors watched in amazement as she demonstrated emergency techniques that seemed impossible. She could stabilize patients from any species, often using equipment that wasn't designed for medical use at all. But how do you know when to break from standard procedures? Asked a gaseous doctor floating in their containment field. We don't always know, he admitted. We make our best guess based on what we understand about biology and medicine. Sometimes we're wrong. But in an emergency, trying and failing is better than not trying at all. The impact of her presentation spread quickly across the galaxy. Medical schools began teaching human-style emergency medicine. Doctors learned to think beyond their training, to understand not just what to do, but why they were doing it. Later that day, He found herself in the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Captain Park joined her there. The council says emergency medical requests for human doctors have increased by 500%, he said. You've started something big. He smiled slightly. I just showed them what every human emergency responder knows. The best tool in an emergency isn't equipment or medicine. It's the ability to think differently when everything goes wrong. As she spoke, another emergency alert sounded through the station. Without hesitation, she turned and headed for the medical bay. The galaxy was learning, but there would always be a need for humans who could work in chaos, who could find solutions where none seemed to exist. The ripple effect of human emergency medicine was just beginning, and it would change galactic healthcare forever. Captain Jai-Ho Park was looking at reports when the impossible happened. 3 different solar systems sent emergency signals at the same time. A massive solar flare, bigger than any recorded in galactic history, was heading toward populated worlds. Show me everything, Jai-Ho ordered. The command center's screens lit up with data from all 3 systems. Billions of lives were at risk. The alien members of the emergency response network were already failing. In the first system, they kept changing their evacuation plans, trying to find a perfect solution. In the second system, they couldn't decide which planets to save first. In the third system, they were still calculating the flare's exact path. This is Captain Park to all emergency stations. Jai-Ho's voice was calm but firm. All human response teams are now activated. This is not a drill. Across the galaxy, human emergency teams moved into action. On Space Station Centauri, Hae-Nul Kim prepared her rescue ships. In the medical center, Yoon-hee Kang gathered her emergency medical supplies. In the engineering section, Soo-Bin Lee started modifying shield generators. Sir, reported an alien assistant, their tentacles waving in distress. Standard procedures say we can't protect all 3 systems at once. We don't have enough resources. Jai-Ho looked at the map of all 3 systems. The alien was right. They didn't have enough ships or shields to protect everything. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes you had to make your resources go further than they were meant to go. Connect me to Commander Choi, Jaiho ordered. When Taeyang's face appeared on the screen, Jaiho didn't waste time. Commander, remember those emergency containment bubbles you made? We need them, but bigger. Much bigger. Understanding showed in Taeyang's eyes. We could modify planetary shield generators the same way. It won't be perfect, but it might work. Do it, Jaiho ordered. Then he turned to his other teams. Newell, take your rescue ships to System 1. Start evacuating the outer planets. Su-bin, go to System 2. Use the modified shields there. Yoon-hee, prepare for casualties from all 3 systems. The human teams moved with practiced speed. They didn't wait for perfect plans or complete information. They acted, adapted, and solved problems as they appeared. In System 1, Newell's teams used cargo ships as emergency evacuation vessels. They weren't designed for it, but they worked. In System 2, Su-bin's engineers turned entire planets' worth of shield generators into modified protection bubbles. In System 3, Taeyang's teams created massive energy deflectors from mining equipment. Hour after hour, the human teams worked without rest. They broke rules, modified equipment, and found solutions that no one had tried before. The alien emergency teams watched and learned, seeing how humans turned impossible situations into difficult but solvable problems. When the solar flare finally hit, it was devastating. Some outer colonies were lost. Many ships were damaged. But billions of lives were saved by solutions that weren't in any manual or protocol. Back on Space Station Centauri, Jaiho finished writing his report to the Galactic Council. The alien council members had watched everything, seen how human teams had handled 3 system-wide emergencies at once. The difference, Jaiho wrote, isn't that humans are braver or smarter. It's that we accept that in a real emergency, you can't wait for a perfect solution. You have to act with the information you have, adapt when things go wrong, and trust your training and instincts. As he sent the report, another emergency signal came in. Without hesitation, Jaiho stood up, ready to face whatever new crisis the galaxy had in store. This was what humans were made for, not because they were special, but because they had learned that the only way to handle chaos was to dive straight into it. Chief Analysis Officer Min Seo Wang stood before the Galactic Council, ready to present the most important report of her career. After 6 months of studying human emergency responses across the galaxy, she had discovered patterns that would change everything. The council chamber was completely full. Representatives from every known species waited to hear why humans had succeeded where others had failed. Even the usually restless council members sat quietly, their attention focused on the human woman at the center of the room. Honored council members, Min Seo began, her voice clear and confident. For years, we thought human emergency response success was about bravery or luck. We were wrong. The truth is much simpler. She activated the main display, showing brain scans from different species during emergencies. The alien brain showed patterns of stress and confusion. The human brain showed something different. Look at these scans, Min Seo said. When faced with danger, most species' minds try to find perfect solutions. Their powerful brains work against them, showing them too many possibilities, too many ways things could go wrong. She switched to the human scans. But human brains do something unique. Under stress, we focus. We see what needs to be done right now, not what might happen later. The council members murmured among themselves, a floating gas being moved forward. But how can focusing on less information lead to better results? Min Seo smiled. Because in a real emergency, you don't need all the information. You need the right information. She showed videos from recent emergencies. Watch our teams in action. They don't try to solve every problem at once. They find the biggest problem and fix it first, then the next, and the next. She showed more data. Emergency response times, survival rates, success percentages. The numbers told a clear story. Human teams consistently saved more lives, even when they had less resources and less time. But there's more, Min Seo continued. Humans don't just act differently in emergencies. We prepare differently too. She showed training simulations from different species. Other species practice until they get everything right. Humans practice until we can't get it wrong. The council watched as she explained how human emergency training worked, how humans learn to trust their instincts, to make decisions with incomplete information, to adapt when plans failed. We don't train our people to follow protocols perfectly, she said. We train them to understand why the protocols exist. This means when something unexpected happens, they can create new solutions that make sense. A crystalline council member's lights flickered with concern. But this seems dangerous. Making decisions without complete information, changing plans during an emergency. It is dangerous, Min Seo agreed. But emergencies are always dangerous. The biggest risk isn't making a mistake. It's waiting too long to act. She showed one final set of data. It compared the success rates of traditional emergency responses with human methods across thousands of incidents. The numbers are clear, she said. Human emergency response methods save more lives. Not because we're special, but because we've learned to work with chaos instead of against it. When Min Seo finished her presentation, the council chamber was silent. Then, one by one, the council members began to signal their agreement. They had finally understood why humans were different, and why that difference was exactly what the galaxy needed. As she left the chamber, Min Seo found Captain Park waiting outside. They understand now, she told him. They finally see that what they thought was our weakness is actually our strength. Park nodded. Understanding is good, he said, but the real test will be what they do with that understanding. The revelation would change emergency response across the galaxy forever. But for humans like Min Seo, it was simply confirmation of what they had always known. Sometimes the best way to handle chaos was to embrace it. 1 year after the Great Solar Flare Crisis, Captain Jai-Ho Park stood in the newly built Galactic Emergency Response Academy on Earth. The massive training facility stretched across several kilometers, with special environments for every known species in the galaxy. The Galactic Council had made their decision. All emergency response units must now have human leadership. This new academy would be where they learned to work together. Welcome to your first day of training, Jai-Ho said to the assembled group of aliens and humans. You're here because the galaxy has learned something important. Emergency response isn't about having the smartest people or the best equipment. It's about having the right mindset. He looked at the faces before him. There were crystalline beings standing next to floating gas clouds. Tree-like creatures shared space with silicon-based life forms. And among them all were human instructors, ready to teach what they knew. Each of you will learn from our best, Jai-Ho continued. Hae Nul Kim will teach you about space rescue operations. Ta Yang Choi will show you how to modify equipment in emergencies. Su Bin Lee will train you in crisis management. Dr. Yum-Hee Kang will teach emergency medicine. And Min Seo Wang will help you understand why our methods work. The training program was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of memorizing procedures, students learned to think creatively. Instead of following fixed protocols, they learned to adapt. Most importantly, they learned the human way of handling chaos. In one classroom, Hae Nul taught students how to make quick decisions. Don't look for the perfect solution. Look for the solution that will work right now. In another room, Ta Yang showed them how to see beyond normal uses for equipment. Everything can be a tool if you understand how it works. Don't just learn what something does. Learn why it does it. Su Bin taught crisis management by creating impossible scenarios. The solution isn't always in the manual. Sometimes you have to write a new manual. Dr. Kang's medical classes challenged everything they knew. Medicine isn't about following rules. It's about understanding why the rules exist, so you know when to break them. And Min Seo helped them understand their own minds. Stress isn't your enemy. It's a tool that can help you focus on what matters most. As the months passed, something remarkable happened. The alien students began to change. They learned to trust their training and make quick decisions. They started finding creative solutions to problems. They began to understand why humans succeeded in chaos. 1 year later, HFY stood with the Galactic Council again, watching graduation day of the Academy. The first class of mixed species emergency responders was ready to serve. They're not trying to be human, HFY explained to the council. They're learning to combine their natural abilities with human emergency response methods. Together, they're better than either could be alone. The council watched as the graduates demonstrated their skills. Crystalline beings made split-second decisions without shattering from stress. Gas creatures adapted their forms to solve problems in new ways. Every species had found their own way to work with chaos instead of against it. As the ceremony ended, HFY felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The galaxy had finally understood why humans were different, and instead of fearing that difference, they had learned from it. The age of perfect protocols is over, he told his team later. The age of adaptive response has begun. Across the galaxy, emergency response was changing. Every ship, station, and colony now had teams ready to face chaos with human-inspired methods. They had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to handle an emergency was the human way.